Back in 2010, when I finished No More Heroes 2, I thought that there would never be a third game, and if there was, that it would be a completely different protagonist since there didn't seem to be too much left to do with Travis. I now know that really creative visionaries can do whatever they want with their own characters, but that's besides the point. I really had no reason to ever expect a third game, and if there ever was a third game, I hope that doesn't do the thing that writers do when writing something for a long time and have aliens enter the plot since their creative juices are running thin. Then Travis Strikes Again came out and gave me hope that we may get a third game, but given how meh the game was to me, it made me worry that a third game might not end up being what people wanted. Well, having finished the game, let's just say that this game isn't Travis Strikes Again. But it did have aliens. They handled them just fine, but let me just get into the game. Also, full-on spoiler mode, so be warned. So the story starts off with you playing G.I. Joe Gaiden. Yeah, the series usually has pretty unique intros, but I think playing a completely different game first is, well, a first. This intro is probably the most unique in the series. Not too long after playing a mediocre beat-em-up, the animated trailer from the Game Awards 2019 plays in full, which then transitions into finally playing as Travis and doing a tutorial, which is probably one of the most intrusive tutorials I've ever seen. Look at how much shit is on screen to keep track of right now! Travis invades his spaceship and kills one of the aliens. Now he is stuck in the intergalactic superhero rankings and must fight his way to number 1 to stop this invasion. But it's still never that simple. The story isn't the most special thing. It's fairly basic and it's surprisingly straightforward in its narrative. Evil aliens show up, go and beat them. It doesn't say or do much more than that. It doesn't always have to, but given how previous games told their stories, I thought that there'd be more. The first game was a deconstruction of anti-heroes and otaku culture, along with minor themes of revenge. The second game was full on about how pointless revenge is, and is the game with the most character development for Travis. And Travis Strikes Again was an interesting look into the negatives of game development and how destructive it can be to creative visions. But this game doesn't really have it. I suppose you could argue how it deconstructs superheroes and how flimsy the definition of superhero can be, but superhero deconstructions has been around for decades, so having unique commentary is very difficult to do. Characters also don't have arcs. Travis doesn't really need one at this point, which is fine. His maturity is definitely much better than the previous games, but since the main game isn't really focused on his story specifically, it makes sense. It's not a big deal to not have arcs, but you'd think at least one character would have personal progression. While the main story is just basic, the characters are all still great, and the individual events are so insane and entertaining that it makes it all worth it. The way the bosses interact with Fu brings a bit of layers to them, and they all have entertaining personalities. Travis has definitely become savvier to the weird characters and gimmicks around him, but if he became fully smart, it would feel very off, so he's still stupid, and it's great.
Alright then.
Fuck you!
Come on, third time's the charm. Let's have a fair fight this time.
I don't trust you for shit. Okay, fine.
Let's do this. Seriously?
Fu doesn't really evolve past being an asshole with an ego issue, but goddamn, he really sells it well, and is very entertaining to watch. It is a shame, though, that Shinobu and Batgirl don't get anything to do. I would like them to have bigger roles, but one game at a time, I guess. And the biggest point in favor towards the quality of this game? Sylvia is actually very tolerable. I know, right? Every character is fairly basic and never evolve, but the personalities are all still so entertaining that it's fine. And, as mentioned before, some of the events in this game are insane. Tons of moments where you transform into a Sentai Ranger and fight in space, a superhero with a buster cannon comes to help you out, Sylvia gets laser eyes out of nowhere and is never explained again. This is definitely the most random and most wacky No More Heroes game, and it still doesn't feel out of place. So the story is fairly basic, and the characters don't advance in their arcs in any way. However, the characters are still incredibly entertaining, and the story is just so over the top that you can't help but enjoy it. The last two number games may have better stories, and the individual character moments are much better done, but this one is probably the most entertaining of the bunch, due to the weirdness or hype moments. The visual and presentation quality of the game are mixed. The graphics of the game look fairly good. Originally the game looked too shiny and glossy, but now it looks much better, and the game on the whole does look good. It doesn't have the dark shading of the original game, but the lighting in the game still looks good, and carries on from Travis Strikes Again, and that looks like a proper HD version of the Wii games, unlike the Heroes Paradise ports. Character models are all very unique and interesting, except the NPCs. They have such an otherworldly design that sets them apart from any previous bosses, but the human ones still have that weird factor, so things still mix together well. Small arenas look generic, but they get the job done, while the look of bosses is so varied and memorable. You got things like a magnetic wrestling ring in space, a pop concert stage, a Kamen Rider filming set, so on and so forth. The environments of the overworld, though, not great. Santa Destroy, despite looking more, well, destroyed, looks alright. It's a nice looking city-like environment to traverse, and it feels kind of nostalgic. And Perfect World is a nice and quaint suburban area, but Call of Battle, Neo Brazil, and 90% of Thunderdome are so barren and boring. Call of Battle is a straight-up World War I battlefield, and because of that, there's nothing visually interesting to grab your attention or look cool. Plus that dumb filter and all the dust makes it hard to see anything. Same with most of Thunderdome. It's a desert. That's it. The center of it is a cool small Japanese-style town that looks visually unique, but the rest... yeah. And Neo Brazil... I don't even know. It's so boring. The game also has a lot of visual noise. There can be times that there's a ton of shit on screen and it makes it difficult to tell what's going on. There's crazy and zany visuals, and then there's... where am I? Also, this game being made in Unreal 4 on a console that really can't handle it shows through some pretty bad popping. Textures can take a while to load, or in some cases just don't load. I haven't seen popping this bad since Unreal 3. The draw distance is also pretty pathetic because of this fact too. I would talk about the inconsistent frame rate, but that's always been an issue in the series, and while normally I would say that this is a negative, and to an extent it still is, I'm giving it a pass since it's a staple at this point. No More Heroes having varying frames is like games journalists being horrible at both gaming and writing articles. It's just built into its DNA. So the game looks good, and the combat environments are pretty cool, but the overworlds are dull looking, and the game has some annoying graphical issues, and there are times that there is too much shit on screen. The gameplay. Oh boy, I've been waiting to get to this section. I should state that I play the game with a traditional controller, which, barring Travis Strikes Again, is a first for me. I am so used to the Wii controls from the first two games, but the normal controls work great. The gameplay in a general sense is still the same as always, but there's enough quality of life changes that makes this game feel the best to play out of all of them. High attacks and low attacks have been replaced with the more traditional normal and heavy attacks, and it is way better for that. As a terrific bonus, heavy attacks now cover a wide range around your body, so you can hit multiple enemies. It makes it easier to not get overwhelmed, while light attacks are great for a single target. No more high and low attacks, just full on light and heavy, and it feels incredible to play. You also get access to more moves that make the melee combat even better. Things like charge attacks are back, there's a dash attack, and you also get Million Stab. This all helps make the melee combat feel great, but it is still simple at its core, true to series tradition. Also, as a nice bonus, you can charge a beam katana while walking. You can't run and it's only a slow walk, but it is very beneficial that you don't only have to stand still now to charge. Those few steps can mean the difference between winning and losing. The ability to jump returns from TSA, and honestly, it shouldn't have come back. Not only is there no platforming in this game, and no flying enemies to take advantage of a real jump attack, but the very few attacks that would require a jump can mostly be dealt with a basic dodge. The jump honestly seemed pointless, and I would have preferred if they just kept the melee attacks from the last games. In this game, you can still wrestle dizzy enemies, but you can only do that with heavy attacks, and even then it's not a guarantee. I think that having the melee mechanic from 2 come back, and maybe refining it a bit, would have been more beneficial than a superfluous jump. On the flip side, dodging is back and better than ever. In the previous games, the dodge was on the D-pad, limiting your dodge to 4 directions. In this game, it is instead assigned to the A button, allowing Travis to dodge in any direction that the analog stick is pointing, which makes it so much better. In addition, the dark slide / perfect dodge in this game is much better. In the first game, the dark slide only works when you dodge an enemy's attack to the side, and all you can do is attack your opponent afterwards. In this game, it's more or less witch time. Or, I guess, assassin time. Everything slows down, and you're free to take advantage of it in any way. It is so good! The game also brings back the death chip abilities from TSA, but handled a little differently this time. You don't have a ton of abilities to use and place how you see fit. Instead, you only have a select 4 that you cannot shift around. However, they are still really strong and very useful. You have a drop kick that is great for you dealing a decent amount of damage very fast and interrupting enemy animations. It also has a short teleporting function to make it easier to hit faraway enemies. You have the ability to slow things down in a limited range. You have an ability to send chip damage to anyone in a certain radius. It sounds useless, but it is terrific, and it's great for hitting enemies that you aren't focusing on to gain damage on them, while you are focused on one enemy, or just add damage to that one enemy. It is way useful when done right. Finally, you have an ability to temporarily move around enemies, and it is very satisfying to toss them around or into other enemies. Also, while the negative that I mentioned in TSA still resides a bit here, it is handled much better since the main combat loop is much better in this game. This game brings back the dash from the first game, but it's heavily reworked. In the first game, it was so fast that it destroys the frame rate, but it was limited by an energy bar and can only be used in non-combat traversal. In 3, you can dash at any point, and it is unlimited energy, but is nowhere near as fast. Both are fine, but being able to dash in battle is a great benefit. I do have some decent sized negatives that I do feel that I need to mention. I wish that you had access to more than just one beam katana. The beam katanas changed up Travis' movesets and had unique mechanics, especially in the second game. It allowed for more variety in the combat and brings some more intricacy out from a basic combat system, and I feel that this game not having it is almost criminal. The game is fun without it, but since the combat is so tight and fun, imagine how much better it could be with more beam katanas with different movesets and maybe even unlockable moves. It would have made this combat undoubtedly the best in the series objectively. I'm not always expecting every action game to be equal to or greater than Devil May Cry, but it still could have been better with bringing back multiple beam katanas. It at least adds to personal customization more than just clothing options. The enemy variety in this game is actually very good. Each enemy has unique design and unique gimmick, and it solves a problem that the first 2 games had with most of the enemies being the same, or at least looking the same. You have enemies that are ranged only, can turn invisible, are melee based, can lock your death glove abilities, etc. It's great. However, they're all lacking one very important aspect that the last 2 number games had. Personality. While the enemies talking could get annoying once in a while, I miss enemies throwing out taunts or screaming something funny in death. And are forever stuck in my head. And that's something that's not present with the enemies in this game at all. Finally, the lack of real levels is disappointing. They were not only great build up to the boss, but they could also be unique in their own ways. However, traditional levels are pretty much non-existent here. You do get challenges where you fight enemies, but like I mentioned in the visual section, they are only arenas and not levels, and they only look okay. I don't know why levels are omitted, but it's a shame. So despite some blemishes here and there, the gameplay is incredibly solid and fun, and probably the best in the series mechanically speaking. The music in this game was kind of a letdown to me. No More Heroes 1 had an amazing soundtrack, and 2's was pretty good too, but only a few songs in this game really stood out to me. Those songs being Itadakimasu, Naomi's Lab, and the musical chair segment, yes, that's a thing in this game. Otherwise, the soundtrack sounds very generic. Supposedly the main composer for this game is the same for TSA, and I also found that soundtrack to be very underwhelming, so that adds up. I wish I could say more, but there's really nothing else I can say about the soundtrack. It's mostly basic and boring. The boss fights though, I have a lot to talk about. They are easily the best part of the game, and it shows about the amazing quality they were given. There's no weak boss in this game. They aren't all of equal quality, but they are all good in their own ways. They are all a fair challenge to keep things fresh, with each one having their own unique mechanics. You have things like a boss that utilizes magnets, a pop music stage of flamethrowers and lasers, playing musical chairs, a very Sentai-like boss fight, so on and so forth. With how good the gameplay is, and the bosses having more unique mechanics, the bosses really stand out. They also have great personalities. While the names are a bit tough, there are more memorable boss fights here than No More Heroes 2, and especially Travis Strikes Again. And the cherry on top? You can refight bosses whenever you want! Yes! Woo! I want this in more games. I will say though that the amount of fake-out fights is a little annoying. No More Heroes has had fake-out fights since the beginning, but they really ramp it up in this game. It's not too big of a deal since the replacements are fun, so I don't have too much of a problem. Except for a Vanishing Point, because his design is cool and I want to know more about him. Besides, how can I be mad at the fake-outs when the final boss is a Smash Bros. Reference? Like, holy hell, this is amazing. The 2D angle is weird, but it is so fun and cathartic to play. If I have a negative overall, it would be that some of the unique gimmicks, while fun and unique, take up time. Like, when you refight bosses, you don't need to do the horror segment or the RPG segment again, and go straight to the boss fight, making me believe that, while fun, it's just padding. It's a fine line between fun minigame and reference, and legit waste of time. But overall, the bosses are really great. Except for one. Now, I am about to go into a rant about one boss, and it may take a bit. So if you just want to go to the next segment, go to the timestamp on screen. Otherwise, here we go. I hate almost everything they did to Henry in this game. Okay, let me get the one positive out of the way first. The actual boss fight is really good. It is still fun and feels like a true evolution of the fight from the first game. You obviously have more of a challenge now since he has 2 beam katanas instead of just 1, but he still has some familiar moves to remind you of that first fight, and to not just have a bunch of random moves. He still does have new moves though to mix things up and not make everything predictable though. It's a fun fight, especially with the already fun combat. Now for the bad. The context around the fight is what I hate about this boss. This is not Henry, and this is not how the rematch should have happened. His personality and voice is completely different, so it doesn't feel like you're properly fighting Henry again. There is almost no build-up to this fight. It's there, but it still feels out of nowhere due to its execution. In comparison to the first game, the build-up is there, but it takes you really paying attention to really notice the build-up pre and post Let's Shake, since it's pretty subtle. But here, he more or less just appears, and the build-up we do have could be easily misinterpreted. His motivation is dumb, in that he wants to fight Travis because he watched Thor 1 and saw how annoying little brothers are. And despite how dumb it is, it somehow still fits the Henry we know, and I'm fine with it. His existence was kind of a joke for the first game as well, so it's not a problem here. The problem is that the rest of the fight is played incredibly seriously and dramatically, so it clashes incredibly hard. This is the big rematch against Henry, and it feels like an afterthought. Like, imagine in Devil May Cry 5 if Urizen wasn't Virgil and was just a completely new character, and before Dante goes to fight him, Virgil appears out of nowhere, has the personality of Nico, loses, and no one mentions it again. How fucked up would that be?
Cash first.
That's how it feels here. This should have been the big climatic rematch to settle things that we've waited for since the end of the first game. And while I'm somewhat okay with the subversion of expectations and that Henry has clones as in himself in some regard, if it still had build-up and felt like the Henry we know to some extent, it wouldn't bother me as much. It would give a good reason for the great fight, not just a great fight with horrible context behind it. Ugh, I digress. There are some little things in this game that I just want to bring attention to. I like that the game is presented like a streaming show, with an intro, outro, and next episode loading screen. It gives this game a unique look, and the 80s style remix of the main theme is so catchy. It somehow gives this game even more of an identity, not that it really needed more. Talking to people is presented like a live stream, and I don't know if this is just another quirky Suda thing or some kind of hidden commentary. Like, we only truly reveal ourselves to each other through the anonymity of the internet or something. maybe I'm thinking too much about it and it's just a dumb thing. Finally, I like the movie Geek Out Sessions with Travis and Bishop. Just two guys hanging out and talking about Japanese movies and anime and video games and stuff. It reminds me of me hanging out with my friends, and just that relaxed feeling is something that I love and it's fun to do. Yeah, no real positives or negatives, just stuff that I like that I want to bring attention to. Alright, let's wrap this up. Overall, this game does have some problems, but despite it all, this is still a good game. The story is fairly basic, and if there is a message, it isn't clear, but the story is still fun, and the characters are a delight. The visuals and performance are hit or miss, but it's never game-breaking. The gameplay is incredibly fun, and probably the best feeling in the series. The music didn't really stand out to me much, but the bosses make up for it by being the best thing in the game and some of the best in the series. This game may have some problems, but it's still so fun. I give this game a 7.8 out of 10. The showdown of the galaxy, the galactic superhero rankings begins.
Hold up. This is like the actual final for real's ending? What the hell is going on? Somebody, explain this to me.
Travis, the battle is not over yet. Your next opponent is up to the north.
We came from the future to kill Uncle Henry.
That cosplaying dickhead killed you and is counting down to this planet's destruction?
Oh, snap!
My great uncle teamed up with some super messed up aliens and was attempting to conquer the planet.
So we have to change the future.
Come with us! Come with us, otherwise you're gonna die.
Oh, snap!
Welcome, Travis, to the Garden of Insanity. Next up, Family War.
Oh, snippity snap!
The story isn't the most special thing. It's fairly basic and is surprisingly straightforward in its narrative. It doesn't have the dark shading of the original game, but the lighting in the game still looks good and carries on from Travis' side. The gameplay. Oh boy, I've been waiting to get to this section. I should state that I played the game with a traditional. Like, we only truly reveal ourselves to each other through the anonymity. Oh god, big words. Oh god, anonymity. Oh god, okay.